I never thought an HOA could try to sell someone else's property, especially not a property that had been in my family for generations. But that's exactly what I discovered when I returned to my family's 5,200-acre farm. And the strangest part? The HOA didn't just claim they had control over my land. They had already sold it. My name is Daniel Carter, and my family's farm sits outside a small rural community in the American Midwest. 5,200 acres of fields, wooded hills, old barns, ponds, and miles of private roads. My grandfather bought the original property decades ago. Over the years, my family expanded the farm parcel by parcel. There was never an HOA on the property. There was never a neighborhood association. And most importantly, there was never a transfer of ownership. So when I received a letter saying that a local HOA had completed the sale of a portion of my farm, I honestly thought it was a mistake. The letter claimed the land had been included in a community development plan. It referenced an alleged access agreement, and at the bottom was a statement saying the property had been transferred to a private development company. I read it 3 times. Then I called the county recorder. The answer I got made my stomach drop. There really was a recorded transaction. Someone had filed paperwork claiming authority over part of my property. But there was one problem. They didn't own it. I drove to the county office the next morning with my original deed records, tax documents, surveys, and every property map I could find. The clerk pulled up the records. And there it was, a document showing that an HOA had apparently authorized the sale. The document described the property as if it were community-owned land. But my family had been paying property taxes on that land for decades, and my deed clearly identified the acreage. Something was seriously wrong. I hired a property attorney, and together we started tracing the paperwork backward. That's when we discovered something even more unbelievable. The HOA had been using an old access agreement as if it were an ownership document. Years earlier, a small residential development near one edge of the farm had received limited access rights across a private road. That agreement allowed residents to travel through a specific corridor. Nothing more. It didn't give them ownership. It didn't give them control over the farm. And it certainly didn't give them the authority to sell the property. But somewhere along the way, the language had been stretched, then copied, then referenced in another document, until the HOA began treating an access right like a property right. And eventually, they used that interpretation to support the sale. My attorney looked at me and said, "They may have built this entire transaction on a legal misunderstanding." But there was already a buyer involved. Construction crews had started surveying the land, and the HOA was acting like the deal was finished. I decided to visit the property. When I arrived, I saw survey markers along one of the fields. A pickup truck was parked near the old barn, and several people were standing around looking at maps. One man approached me. He said they had been told the property was part of a new development project. I asked him one simple question. "Who told you they owned this land?" He pointed toward the road. The HOA. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than a paperwork mistake. People were making decisions based on documents that appeared to give them rights they never actually had. My attorney filed a formal challenge. The HOA responded aggressively. They argued that the community had relied on the documents in good faith. They claimed the sale should remain valid, and they suggested that my family had somehow allowed the situation to develop over the years. But then we presented the original records, the surveys, the tax history, the chain of title, and the original access agreement. Piece by piece, the story started falling apart. The access agreement covered a narrow route. The alleged sale covered thousands of acres. The HOA had authority over neither. Then came the court hearing. The courtroom was packed. Representatives from the HOA sat on one side. The development company sat behind them. I sat beside my attorney with a folder containing decades of family records. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. Then he asked the HOA's attorney a very simple question. "Where is the document showing that the HOA owned this property?" Silence. The attorney pointed to the access agreement. The judge looked at it, then looked back at him. "This appears to establish access," he said, "not ownership." Nobody in that courtroom moved. The judge continued reviewing the records. Then he found the original deed. The legal description matched my family's property. The tax records matched. The surveys matched. And there was no transfer from my family to the HOA. Without that transfer, there was nothing for the HOA to sell. The judge issued his ruling. The supposed sale was reversed. The recorded transaction was set aside, and the property rights were restored to the rightful owner, my family. Just like that, the deal that had been presented as completed was gone. The development company had to stop its plans. The HOA lost the authority it had claimed, and thousands of acres returned to the legal status they had always had, mine. But the biggest lesson wasn't about the size of the farm. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about paperwork. A document can look official. A signature can look convincing. A recorded filing can make something appear legitimate. But none of that automatically creates ownership where ownership never existed. My grandfather used to tell me, know what you own and know where the boundaries are. I never understood how important those words were until this happened. Today, the old farm roads are still there, the barns are still standing, the fields are still being worked, and the land that my family spent generations protecting is still ours. The HOA thought it had found a shortcut through an old agreement. Instead, it walked straight into court and discovered the difference between having access to someone's property and actually owning it, and that difference changed everything. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because you never know what can happen when an HOA crosses the wrong property line.